I hadn't planned to come back here, not like this, not with a single suitcase in the backseat of my dusty car and the ashes of my grandmother still warm in a plain wooden box beside me. The gravel driveway curled like a sleeping snake through the tall pines, winding toward a place I remembered only in fragments: soft hay, old laughter, sunlight in the shape of a horse's ears. Now, every shadow stretched too far. Every memory arrived too late. I parked beneath the drooping sycamore tree. The house loomed ahead, silent and untouched. A heavy wind moved through the tall grass around it like breath. I gripped the box in my lap for a second longer before stepping out, keys in one hand, a part of my soul, still gone, in the other. The front door stuck, as always. I had to lean my shoulder into it like she used to. Inside, the scent was exactly the same: lavender, dust, and the ghost of something warm. Everything was as she'd left it: afghans folded, books shelved in impossible towers, one chipped mug on the windowsill. But she wasn't here. No voice saying, "You look too thin," no kettle whistling, no arms that always pulled you in tighter than expected. Just silence. The kind that crawls up the walls and waits in doorways. I dropped my bags by the stairs. For a long time I didn't move. I just stood there, surrounded by furniture that remembered better days. The floor creaked under my weight, an echo of all the years that had come before. Years when I'd run barefoot through these halls. Years when I still knew who I was. But now? I didn't even know why I'd returned. Only that there was no one else. No job that needed me. No partner waiting. No home of my own. Just this place, and the weight of what I'd lost. That night, I unpacked nothing. I just curled on the couch and watched the light disappear through the lace curtains, trying not to cry. Trying not to remember too much. The next morning, a sound woke me. Hooves. Sharp against the earth. Distant, but real. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. But then it came again, steady, deliberate. I stood, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside. The air smelled of pine needles and wet dirt. Mist hugged the fields like a secret. I followed the fence line down toward the barn, the grass brushing against my jeans. My boots crunched softly against old gravel paths, half swallowed by weeds. The barn was exactly as I remembered: red, weather-worn, and crooked in that charming, tired way. Its double doors hung slightly open. A chill ran up my spine. I hadn't expected anything to be alive out here. I figured the animals had all been sold or relocated when Grandma fell ill. But there he was. A single horse. Tall, proud, and impossibly still. He stood in the far stall, eyes dark and unreadable, mane tangled and wild. Dust hung around him like mist. His coat shimmered dark bronze in the morning light. Muscles coiled beneath his skin like held breath. He didn't move when I entered. He just watched. Something about his gaze made my lungs forget how to work. "Hey," I whispered, stepping closer. "You're still here." The plaque on the stall read Echo. Of course. Grandma's favorite. The horse she swore could read hearts. The one no one else had ever truly tamed. I remembered feeding him sugar cubes when I was little, his velvet lips brushing my tiny fingers. I remembered his whinny when Grandma called his name from the porch, the way he'd gallop in as if nothing else in the world mattered. But now, he was different. He looked at me like he didn't believe I was real. "Did they forget about you?" I whispered. "Or, did you stay on purpose?" He flicked one ear but didn't approach. Still watching. Still silent. I backed away slowly, giving him space, my chest tight. He was alive. He was real. And somehow, that felt like the first good thing since everything fell apart. The following days passed in a blur. I cleaned the kitchen. Fixed the heater. Sorted through letters stacked like time bombs in dusty drawers. I tried not to look at Grandma's favorite chair or her reading glasses still sitting on the edge of the fireplace. But every morning, I went to see Echo. He never came to the gate. Never whinnied. Just stood there, watching. Waiting. I brought him oats. Brushed the dust from his stall. Left the door open a little longer each day. And still, he kept his distance. But I talked to him. I told him about the city. About how loud everything had been. How quiet everything was now. About the job I'd lost and the apartment I couldn't afford and the people who'd stopped calling once grief made me strange. I don't think I belong anywhere anymore, I said to him one afternoon, leaning on the fence. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I just woke up one day and everything was gone. Echo didn't flinch. Didn't blink. But I swear he understood. Not in the way humans do, but in the way wild things sometimes carry secrets without speaking them. That night, it rained. Hard. Lightning split the sky wide open, and thunder rolled across the hills like falling trees. The power flickered twice and died. I grabbed a flashlight and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. And then I heard it. A shrill, panicked whinny, cutting through the wind like a scream. Echo. I didn't think. I just ran. The mud sucked at my boots as I sprinted across the yard, flashlight bouncing. Rain lashed against my skin. The barn doors banged against the frame, one already hanging loose. Inside, Echo reared up, his eyes wild, his breath fogging the air. The storm must have terrified him. Part of the roof had caved in, and would lay shattered near his stall. He was trapped. Easy, I called out, my voice shaking. It's okay, Echo, it's okay. I moved slowly toward him, heart hammering. He pawed the ground, panic rising. I reached the stall gate and pushed it open. He didn't charge. Didn't bolt. He turned toward me, breathing hard, sides heaving. And I stepped closer. Closer. Come on, boy, I whispered. I'm here now. My fingers brushed his soaked muzzle. He didn't move. He let me touch him. He leaned into it. And something broke in me. Not like a window shattering. More like a lock giving way. The storm outside roared, but inside that stall, something quiet and unspoken passed between us. Not ownership. Not command. Just presence. Just trust. Just not being alone. Back inside, hours later, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and stared out at the field. Somewhere out there, Echo stood under the stars, calm again. He had let me in. And I realized something I hadn't dared say aloud until that moment. He was all I had left. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning after the storm felt unreal, too quiet, too clean, as if the night hadn't just roared through the valley and rattled the bones of the old barn. Sunlight spilled in golden ribbons across the floorboards, dust rising like memories in its path. I stood barefoot at the back door, clutching a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, staring out toward the pasture. And there he was. Echo. He stood alone, drenched in morning light, motionless except for the soft flick of his tail. His dark coat shimmered like wet stone, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he was real, or just a dream left over from the storm. But he was real. He had been real when I touched his muzzle in the thunder and chaos. He had leaned into my palm. He had let me be close. And somehow, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I found my grandmother's old notebook in the kitchen drawer later that day, weathered and full of half-legible notes about the horses she'd raised over the years. Each one had its quirks, its stories. But Echo had more pages than all the others combined. Doesn't trust easily, she had scribbled in one corner. But once he does, he follows you home. I didn't understand what she meant, not yet. But I held on to those words like a map through fog. I spent the day fixing the damage in the barn. A broken plank here, a torn tarp there. Echo watched from the field, always near the fence line, never too far. When I paused to wipe sweat from my brow, I caught him staring. Not in a wild, guarded way like before, but curiously. Intently. Like he was trying to piece something together too. That afternoon, I brought him apples. I approached slowly, my hand open, palm flat the way Grandma taught me. My heart thudded harder than it should have, it felt like some sacred test I wasn't quite ready to pass. He stood still. Then, 2 slow steps forward. Another. The apple disappeared from my hand in one swift, gentle bite. His lips brushed my fingers again. That same electric calm settled over me. "You remembered," I whispered, smiling without even trying. He snorted softly, his breath warm against my wrist. And just like that, we weren't strangers anymore. Each day after that fell into rhythm. I woke at dawn, fed Echo, and walked the fences while the mist still clung to the fields. I fixed what I could, learned how to do what I couldn't. I read Grandma's notes, page by page. I cooked only simple meals. I talked to no one. Except him. And he listened. Not in the way humans do, no polite nodding or half-distracted grunts, but wholly. With his eyes, with the tilt of his head, with the stillness of his body when I sat beside the fence and poured out everything I didn't even know I'd been carrying. He became the silence that answered me back. One evening, I brought out an old grooming kit. The brushes were stiff, the handles cracked, but they still smelled faintly of cedar oil and lavender. I approached him in the barn as the sun dipped low. He stood in his stall, ears relaxed, eyes half-lidded. "I don't know if you'll let me," I murmured, holding up the brush. "But I'd like to try." I waited. And then, slowly, I stepped forward. He didn't move away. He let me brush the dust from his shoulders, the dried mud from his legs. He shifted slightly, even leaned into it when I found a sweet spot behind his ear. I laughed softly. The sound felt foreign in my throat, like a melody I hadn't sung in years. "There you go," I whispered. "You're beautiful, you know that?" His ear twitched at my voice. I brushed until the stars came out. But not every day was easy. There were mornings when Echo paced restlessly, spooked by some invisible change in the air. Days when he refused to let me touch him. He would turn away, retreat to the far end of the paddock, his muscles tense, his body language closed. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Not because I expected him to be perfect, but because it reminded me that healing wasn't a straight path. That trust wasn't permanent. It had to be earned again, and again, and again. Just like mine. Some days I didn't want to leave the house at all. The grief would sneak up behind me and sit heavy on my shoulders, Grandma's perfume lingering in a scarf, her handwriting on a recipe card, the sound of her wind chimes clinking in the breeze. But I went outside anyway. I showed up for him even when I didn't know how to show up for myself. And somehow, he did the same. One cloudy afternoon, I found myself staring at the old riding tack in the storage room. Saddles cracked with age, bridles stiff with disuse. Echo hadn't been ridden in years. I didn't even know if he still could be. But something pulled me toward the idea. Not yet. But maybe, soon. I carried one saddle outside and began cleaning it. Leather soap, old rags, elbow grease. It gave my hands something to do. Gave my mind somewhere to rest. Echo stood nearby, watching. I looked up at him. "I don't know if you'd even let me on your back." He blinked slowly. "Or if I'd have the courage to try." He exhaled through his nose, the softest sound. I smiled to myself. Let's just take it slow. That night, a fog rolled in thick and cold. I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts. Too many memories pressing in all at once. I pulled on my sweater and walked barefoot out to the porch. The fog curled around my ankles like smoke. Somewhere out there, Echo stood in the pasture, his figure swallowed by the mist. I sat on the top step and wrapped my arms around my knees. "I feel like I'm disappearing," I whispered to the night. "Like the old me is gone, and the new me hasn't shown up yet." A soft nicker answered from the darkness. I looked up, startled. There he was. Echo, walking slowly toward the porch, his shape materializing like a dream in the fog. He stopped just a few feet away, staring at me. I stood. And this time, I didn't wait for him to come closer. I went to him. Wrapped my arms gently around his neck. Buried my face in his mane. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. He was warm and solid and steady. And I was not alone. That was the night I realized something had shifted. Not just in him. In me. The house still echoed with loss. The barn still creaked under its weight. But now, when I walked those paths, I didn't feel like a ghost moving through a memory. I felt like someone becoming real again. Echo had stopped pacing. He followed me now when I crossed the pasture, sometimes at a distance, sometimes right at my side. He let me lead him without a rope. He brushed his muzzle against my shoulder when I leaned on the fence. And I spoke less. Not because I had less to say. But because I no longer needed to fill the silence with noise. One morning, as the sun rose behind the barn and set the dewy grass ablaze in orange and gold, I stood beside Echo with my hand resting gently on his neck. He turned his head slightly and looked at me. There was no fear in his eyes anymore. No distance. Just knowing. And I realized he hadn't just let me in. He had taken over. Not with force, not with noise, but with presence. With patience. With the quiet understanding only animals, and maybe grandmothers, ever truly mastered. There was no exact moment when everything changed. No switch flipped. No sudden sunrise after the storm. It just happened. One day I realized I hadn't cried in the shower. The silence in the house didn't feel suffocating anymore, it just was. And Echo no longer stood at the far edge of the field like a sentry guarding his memories. He came when I called. He stayed close. He listened, not because I spoke, but because I existed. And that was enough. I began building routines. Not because I needed structure, but because I wanted something steady to hold on to. Something that would happen whether the world made sense or not. Each morning started the same: hot coffee, cold air, boots by the back door. Echo would already be waiting at the fence, his breath steaming in the dawn. Sometimes he nickered softly when he saw me. Sometimes he just stood there, patient and still, as if to say, I knew you'd come. I always did. I mucked the stalls, restocked hay, checked the old water pump. I repaired broken fence rails and oiled creaky hinges. I cleaned the tack, even if I wasn't using it. I swept the barn floor in long, even strokes, more meditation than chore. Sometimes I spoke to Echo. Sometimes I didn't. It didn't matter. We understood each other in the quiet. There was one morning, early spring, frost still hugging the tips of the grass, when I sat on a bale of hay with a thermos of coffee, watching him graze. He lifted his head and looked at me, long and slow, like he was trying to read my thoughts. And I found myself saying something I hadn't dared speak aloud until then. I was supposed to get married last year. His ears twitched. We had a date. A venue. I even had the dress. I laughed, though it didn't feel funny. It felt like ripping a bandage off skin I hadn't realized was still bleeding. But he left. Said I wasn't there anymore. Said I didn't laugh the way I used to. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. Maybe he was right. Echo walked toward me then, slow, deliberate steps, until he was close enough to rest his chin gently on my shoulder. I didn't move. I let him stay there, his warmth pressing into my side. And I knew, without needing words, that he didn't care who I had been. Only who I was, here and now. I started writing again. Journals mostly. Thoughts I couldn't say out loud. Things I didn't want to forget, like the way Echo's coat shone in the afternoon light or the way his hooves sounded against the old barn floor. I wrote about my grandmother. About the lullabies she used to hum while brushing the horses. About how I missed her voice more than anything. Sometimes I left the journal open in the tack room, half hoping she might read it from wherever she was. Sometimes I caught myself whispering to the wind, just in case she was listening. One afternoon, as the wind danced through the wildflowers and the sky threatened rain, I brought out the old lunge line. I didn't know if Echo would respond, but I wanted to try. We started small. Circles in the pasture. Gentle cues. No saddle, no bit. Just his halter, my voice, and the language of movement. At first, he was hesitant. Not resistant, but uncertain. Like a dancer remembering choreography after years off stage. But soon, the rhythm returned. He trotted gracefully, ears flicked toward me, eyes steady. I breathed with him. Moved with him. Trusted him. And he trusted me back. We didn't need to be fast. We didn't need to be perfect. We just needed to move, together. Later, as the sun set low and golden, I sat cross-legged in the pasture while Echo grazed nearby. The grass was cool against my legs. The sky bled orange into lavender. Somewhere, an owl called. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, I felt safe. Not just in the physical sense. But in that deep, hard-to-explain way. Like I didn't need to guard myself anymore. Like the world, for once, wasn't asking anything from me. Just being was enough. I opened my eyes to find Echo standing over me, staring. I smiled and reached out. He lowered his head and let me touch his cheek. You know, I whispered, you're kind of taking over my life. He snorted softly, as if in agreement. I leaned my forehead against his. I think I'm okay with that. But healing is rarely a straight line. There was a day, cold and gray, when I woke up heavy again. One of those days where the air itself feels too thick. Where nothing's really wrong, but everything aches. I barely left the house. Just sat in the kitchen, staring at nothing. Echo stood outside, waiting. I didn't go to him. I couldn't. And yet, as the day dragged on, I saw him out there, still near. Still watching. I finally stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a blanket, tears stinging behind my eyes. He walked to me. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just, present. And when I sat on the top step, he rested his head in my lap. We stayed like that for hours. No fixing. No rushing. Just being. And that, somehow, was enough. That night, I dreamed of running. Barefoot across the field. Laughing. Light. Echo was beside me, matching my pace stride for stride. Wind in my hair, stars overhead. The house glowing behind us like a memory we'd made peace with. When I woke, my cheeks were wet. But I was smiling. The next few weeks passed in gentle rhythm. The days grew longer. The grass greener. Birds returned to the trees. Life unfolded in quiet increments. I found a saddle that chest. You stayed. He didn't move. Didn't need to. I could feel it in the silence between us. He had taken over the parts of me that had gone numb. Not with noise. Not with force. But with presence. With patience. With trust. And as I walked back to the house that night, the wind in the trees whispering through the dark, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to hope before. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live again. Not despite the loneliness. But through it. And I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. The morning started like any other, calm, quiet, golden. A breeze moved softly through the open fields, brushing the tall grass as if smoothing down unruly hair. Birds sang above the tree line, and the air was warm with the promise of spring turning into something more. I saddled Echo without hesitation. It had been weeks since I started working with him daily, lunging, walking, slowly rebuilding the bridge between memory and motion. He'd let me sit bareback once, for only a few seconds, just to feel it again. And that was enough to awaken something in me I had long buried. Today felt different. Today, I thought we were ready. He stood still as I adjusted the stirrups, his tail flicking lazily. I placed a palm on his shoulder and looked him in the eye. "You good?" I whispered. He blinked slowly. Calm. Trusting. I swung one leg over and settled into the saddle, my heart thudding softly, but not with fear. More like reverence. We started at a walk. Hoofs pressed gently into the softened earth, rhythmic and steady. I guided him toward the back meadow, where the trees opened wide and wildflowers grew in clusters too thick to name. It was where I used to ride as a child, when the world was simpler and my grandmother's voice was never more than a breath away. Echo moved beneath me like a poem, graceful, grounded. I exhaled. Closed my eyes for a second too long. And that's when it happened. A rabbit, startled from the underbrush, darted across the trail ahead. Echo tensed. I opened my eyes. And everything fractured. In one instant, he reared up, sharply, violently, not out of rebellion, but instinct. His body arched, legs kicking at the air. The sky spun. My hands lost the reins. My weight shifted wrong. And then, the world tipped. I hit the ground with a sickening crack. For a few seconds, everything went black. Then sound returned, muted at first, then sharper. The wind in the trees. The distant gallop of hooves. And a pain, deep, dull, blooming in my side like a bruise that hadn't yet made it to the surface. I tried to move. My breath caught. Pain shot up my ribs, wrapping around my spine. I gasped and fell back into the grass, dizzy, heart pounding. Echo, I croaked. But he was gone. Panic surged. Not because I was alone, but because he was. Anything could happen. A fall, a broken leg, a car on the nearby road, my mind spun through every nightmare scenario at once. I forced myself to breathe. Slowly. Carefully. I reached for my phone, tucked into my jacket. No bars. Of course. The sun dipped behind a cloud. The wind picked up, cooler now. I was stranded. And for the first time since coming back here, I felt that old, familiar fear. The one that whispered, "You were stupid to trust. Stupid to hope. You'll always be alone." But then, hooves. Fast. Coming back. I turned my head toward the sound, vision blurring. Echo. Charging through the trees, wild-eyed, but not running away. Running to me. He skidded to a stop a few feet away, flanks heaving, eyes wide with frantic recognition. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He stepped closer, snorted once, then lowered his head until his nose brushed my cheek. I closed my eyes. He was warm. Solid. Real. And he had come back. I managed to push myself upright with a groan, my body screaming in protest. "Okay," I whispered through clenched teeth. "We're gonna figure this out." Echo stood beside me like a sentry, unmoving. I looped one arm around his neck and tried to rise. My knees buckled. He stepped in, almost as if to catch me. "I need you," I whispered. And somehow, he understood. He stood perfectly still as I leaned against him, his strength becoming an extension of my own. Step by step, we moved. Across the field. Through the fence gate. Back toward the house. It took a lifetime. Maybe two. But we made it. Together. Later, wrapped in blankets on the couch, my ribs tightly bandaged, I stared at the ceiling and let the tears fall. Not from the pain. Not from fear. But from something deeper. Echo had come back for me. Not because I asked. Because he chose to. That was more than loyalty. More than training. It was trust. The kind I hadn't dared give anyone in years. The kind I thought had died with everything else I'd lost. And yet, there it was. Alive. Breathing. Standing outside the window, grazing calmly, as if nothing had happened at all. The next few days were slow. Bruised ribs, a strained shoulder, and a doctor's firm order to take it easy meant no chores, no lifting, no writing. I slept a lot. Read some. Wrote more than usual. And watched Echo from the window every chance I got. He never wandered far. Sometimes, I'd find him staring at the house, ears perked, as if checking to see if I was okay. Other times, I'd hobble out onto the porch and sit wrapped in quilts while he stood just beyond the railing. He didn't need to be petted. Didn't demand attention. He just was. And that was enough. I thought about what would have happened if he hadn't returned. If I'd been left there in the field, broken and alone. But he had returned. He had taken over in the way only he could, without words, without promises. With action. With presence. With love. And that realization broke something in me all over again. Not a painful breaking. A freeing one. A tearing down of the last, brittle wall I hadn't realized I'd kept up. One evening, I limped to the barn with a flashlight and a pocket full of apples. Echo met me at the gate, silent and still. I held out my hand. He stepped forward, took the apple gently, then nudged my shoulder. I laughed. You scared me, you know. He blinked. You probably scared yourself too. Another blink. But I don't blame you. His tail swished softly. I'd ride again, you know. Just, not yet. He lowered his head and brushed his nose against my chest. And I knew he understood. We didn't have to go fast. We didn't have to do everything right away. We just had to keep showing up. As the sky darkened and stars began to flicker awake above the hills, I sat in the barn beside Echo, my back against a bale of hay, his warmth close enough to feel. I thought of my grandmother. Of all the years she spent out here, training, loving, listening. Maybe she'd known this would happen. Maybe that's why Echo had stayed. Not because he was forgotten. But because I was coming. Because we still had something to finish. And now, we were finishing it. Not with a perfect ride. Not with galloping through meadows under the sun. But like this. Side by side. Breathing in the same air. Healing in the same silence. Becoming whole, together. The scar on my side had started to fade. Not completely, not yet. But it no longer ached when I stretched, and the deep bruises were slowly giving way to skin that looked like mine again. Healing, I'd learned, was never a moment. It was 100 quiet choices to keep going, even when everything inside whispered to stop. It had been 6 weeks since the fall. 6 weeks of recovery. Of watching the world move through my window. Of listening to Echo's hooves outside the porch as if they were a heartbeat calling me back to life. And now, I was ready. The saddle sat waiting on the rail fence, polished and prepped. Echo stood still, eyes half-lidded in the morning sun. He looked calm, unbothered. But I knew he could feel the change in the air. The shift in me. Today was different. Today, I wasn't just surviving. I was coming back. The first time I set my foot in the stirrup again, my heart stuttered. Not with fear, well, not just fear, but with the weight of everything that had led me here. My grandmother's death. The silence of the house. The loneliness that had nearly swallowed me. And then, Echo. The way he had taken over the space where pain used to live. Not with magic. Not with miracles. Just with quiet, constant presence. With loyalty. With love, of the kind that doesn't need to speak its name. He didn't flinch as I mounted. Didn't shift or sidestep. He stood still, waiting. Like he'd known all along I'd get here eventually. I settled into the saddle and took a breath so deep it almost hurt. "Let's go," I whispered. And we did. We walked first. A slow, steady rhythm through the lower pasture, past the sycamore tree and the leaning fence post I kept forgetting to fix. The sun rose behind us, golden and warm. Birds called from high above, and the wind carried the scent of wild thyme. I guided him toward the trail through the woods, my grandmother's favorite ride. She used to call it the whispering path because of the way the trees murmured when the breeze passed through. As a child, I'd believed they were telling stories. Maybe they still were. Echo's ears perked as we entered the shade. His pace didn't falter. I leaned forward and rested my hand lightly on his neck. "You're doing so good." He flicked one ear back toward me, as if to say, "You too." Halfway through the trail, something strange happened. A noise, a sharp snap of branches, deeper in the woods. Echo stopped instantly, head up, muscles taut. I held the reins tighter. "What is it?" Another sound. Closer this time. A low rustle. "Something moving." Echo snorted, shifting under me. And then, out from the brush, a deer burst into the path, eyes wide, hoofs striking the dirt as it leapt across and vanished into the trees again. My heart pounded. But Echo didn't rear. He didn't bolt. He stood his ground, solid, breathing hard but not panicked. I leaned forward, burying my face briefly in his mane. "You stayed calm," I whispered. "You stayed with me." And that's when I knew. The fall hadn't broken us. It had made us stronger. We came out of the woods into the upper meadow, a wide, open stretch where the grass grew long and golden, untouched by fence lines. My grandmother used to gallop here. I'd watched her from the porch as a child, her laughter echoing across the field, her hair flying like a banner behind her. It had always felt like freedom. Now it was mine. I shifted in the saddle and gave Echo a nudge. He started to trot, then canter, his strides long, effortless. The wind tore at my clothes, my hair, but I didn't care. I laughed, loud, unguarded, for the first time in years. And Echo ran with me. Not ahead. Not behind. With me. Like we were two halves of the same breath. When we finally slowed, breathless and glowing, I dismounted and let him graze. I lay back in the grass, staring up at the sky, the clouds drifting like ships across a sea I hadn't dared look at for months. And I thought, this is what home feels like. Not the house. Not the land. Him. The way he looked at me. The way he stood by me. The way he knew, without needing words, what I needed most. That evening, I walked through the house with a different kind of purpose. Room by room, I cleared away what no longer served me. I boxed up old papers. Cleaned out drawers. Dusted the corners of spaces that hadn't been touched since the funeral. I lit candles. Opened windows. Let the breeze stir the air and carry the past gently into the night. Then I went to the barn. Echo lifted his head as I approached, his ears forward, curious. I opened the gate to his stall and walked in, barefoot on the hay-strewn floor. "I want to show you something," I whispered. He followed me without hesitation. Together, we walked around the far side of the barn, toward the section I'd started rebuilding weeks earlier, before the fall. Back then, it had just been an idea. A sketch in my notebook. A wish I hadn't spoken aloud. Now, it was real. A second stall. Then a third. An empty tack room, freshly painted. New feed bins. All waiting. "I think," I said, turning to Echo, "I want to bring in more." He stood still, listening. "Horses like you. The ones nobody wanted. The ones who got left behind." I swallowed hard. "People like me." The wind tugged softly at my shirt. A bird chirped from the fence post. "I want this place to mean something again." Echo stepped forward and nudged my hand. I looked into his eyes and felt the world settle around me. "You think she'd be proud?" I asked quietly. He blinked, then leaned his head against my chest. And I knew. She already was. Months passed. The sanctuary grew, one rescued mare, then two. A pony with one blind eye. A retired racehorse with scars on his legs and fire still in his blood. And always, Echo led them. Not with dominance. With presence. With calm. The way he'd led me. One autumn morning, as the leaves fell like golden confetti and mist curled around the paddocks, I stood at the fence, coffee in hand, watching Echo trot across the field with a new arrival at his side. And I thought about everything I'd lost. Everything I'd found. Everything that had changed. I was still healing. Still learning. But I was no longer running from the silence. Because now, the silence had a heartbeat. Later that day, I sat in the grass near the barn, notebook open on my knees. On the first page, I wrote. I was all alone, and he took over. Not my freedom. Not my will. Just my fear. My silence. My pain. And he gave me something in return. Something stronger. Something that doesn't vanish when the storm comes, or when the world spins sideways. Belonging. As the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of fire, I stood and called his name. Echo. He lifted his head. And ran. Straight to me.